This podcast is brought to you by Tethered. One of the challenges for me in all my gear and what I take with me is always trying to stay public land legal. And what I mean by this is a lot of times when you're hanging gear, the only way or the most common way is to use some type of screw-in mechanism. In the past, I started making tethers out of paracord that I could hang stuff on in the tree. That way I wasn't having to screw anything into the tree and so forth. But Tethered up their game as they always do and thought of the public land mobile hunter and their needs. And they've come out with the Hiss strap, which I recently started using, which is a 7-foot long piece of webbing that is daisy chained. And it also pairs nicely with their Hiss Pro Pack, which is a combination of some S-beaners as well as a pro clip. And so I hang everything from my bow to my backpack to binos to rangefinder, whatever the case is that I'm bringing into the tree with me. I use this Hiss strap for that and those various carabiners and S-hooks. So if you want to learn more about either the Hiss strap or the Hiss Pro Pack, or do you want to learn about their saddle and predator platform setup, head to tetherednation.com and check them out. First thing I do in the morning before a hunt is, of course, I have to have my morning coffee, and I'm sure most of you out there probably feel the same. Make sure you're filling your mug with Skull Brew coffee, as it is the only coffee company that is both 2% for conservation certified and, of course, donates 10% of their profits to conservation organizations who are helping us to secure the future of our wild places. So head to skullbrewcoffee.com and choose between 3 kilo roasts of coffee and know that you are supporting conservation with every sip. All right, if you listen to this podcast for any length of time, you guys know that I am good friends with all the guys over at Exodus. And I want to give you a quick heads up that you should be checking out some of their content if you haven't already. They have a podcast out called Trail Cam Radio, and they release new episodes every Tuesday. So the day before you listen to this one, you could be listening to that one as well. They've done some deep dives with some great guests. You'll recognize some of these names as Jeff Sturgis, Dan Enfalt, and the Hunting Public. And they also jump into and talk to some less-known hunters who consistently are getting it done many times on public land. If you prefer to watch podcasts, if you're looking for some video content, they have a YouTube channel as well, and that is packed, of course, with great videos and interviews. One of the most popular ones they did is a candid interview with John Eberhardt, and if you know anything about John, you always get the straight dope from him. And for specifically my PA listeners, they just recently posted a public land big woods interview with Steve Shirk, which I consumed, and it is pretty awesome. This dude's killing hammers and getting on giant deer in Pennsylvania, so it's absolutely a must listen. So if you're looking for more whitetail content, especially here during the course of the season, you just can't get enough. Be sure to head over to their podcast, Trail Cam Radio, and their YouTube channel, Exodus Trail Cameras, and drop them a subscription or review and let them know that Truth from the Stand sent you. If you're also in the market for a trail camera, over the last 4 years, of course, Exodus has consistently showed they build quality trail cameras that flat out just work. Of course, the best trail camera warranty, period. Every single camera is backed by a 5-year warranty and even comes with a theft and damage coverage. That's right, 5 years, literally half a decade, you'll be covered by the Exodus 5-year warranty. But more than likely, you won't need it because the cameras are built to last. All right, what is going on out there? Happy Wednesday to everyone. Hope you're doing well and feeling fine. Hope you're getting a little timber time. There's actually a cold front brewing here on Thursday and Friday that I'm hoping that I might get out and see a little bit of. Not 100% sure that's going to happen. Have some work things that need to be taken care of. So we'll plan to try to get out. I'm thinking Friday might be the day of opportunity. I really don't want to miss it because it's going to be a good temp drop. I think the high on Thursday is supposed to be 53, and I think Friday it's supposed to be 56. And then warms up just a little bit on Saturday, I think up to like 62, but I have a wedding on Saturday, so not sure what that's gonna hold. So this past week though was an interesting week for whitetail hunting for me. I got out in the middle of the week, was pitched a shutout yet again on this public piece where I had that deer, or those handful of deer that I was watching or following this summer and early fall, and they've no-show Jonesed me a couple times in a couple different spots. So this particular piece kind of has 2 sections to it, and I think I mentioned it before. It's kind of divided by a swamp. And the one piece, that I had been hunting on, that I had cameras on and had a good feeling about if I could get in early before pressure mounted, that I would have an opportunity. But it just hasn't played out the way I thought it would. And so I had assumed that once that happened, that the deer would probably transition, or the smart deer or the mature deer would probably transition and move over to the part of the public that was on the opposite side of the swamp. There's some nasty stuff to cross, super muddy, thick, just basically a shitty thing to walk through. And it's the furthest piece it's away from access or parking or anything like that. So I assumed there would be less pressure over there. And so once I got done hunting Saturday morning, I got down around 9:30, realizing that I'm not going to probably see anything at that point, and decided that I was going to get down. I had already made this plan, Friday night, that, I'm going to give myself to about 9:30. If I don't see anything, I'm going to get down, and then I'm just going to spend the afternoon scouting, and I'm going to walk basically that piece and one other piece that I have. I know that there's a couple good deer on it, and I'm basically going to walk it until I find fresh sign. Because at this point, my travels and doing a little bit of hiking / still hunting and into hunt, I've yet to see any decent deer sign or anything that would even I would even go as far as to say resemble fresh, deer sign. Doesn't even have to be great. I'm talking about just saying that there's proof of life. So my plan was really to get down and see if I could find proof of life. And I was going to focus the first part on this other part of this property and the swampy, nasty shit, and see if that deer had made his way over there, or if deer in general had made their way over there. And so I hopped down, got going. It was what I thought. It was super thick. Immediately, as soon as I got over there, you could just see the browse pressure on that side of the property was insane in comparison to what I was seeing on the part that I had been hunting. So that told me, a couple things. One, that there was plenty of deer there, eating the browse down, that there should be deer around, and that I was hopeful that I'd run into deer sign. And so it didn't take very long, probably the first 5 minutes I was there, and I kicked the deer up. Didn't see it. Don't know what it was. I feel like it was a solo deer, but the swamp grass and everything in there, and the stem count's so high that I didn't get a visual really on anything except a tail going. And there could have been more than one in there as well, and I just don't know. So with that, I kept kind of pushing forward, and I knew on looking at the maps, like there was a transition line that was pretty definitive on the map, and my goal was really like, if I could, I wanted to get to that, and I wanted to walk up and down that transition, and I wanted to see if there was any sign that was laid down there, because I thought that would be a good place to start, of course, to see if there's sign laid down. So I got to that point, and things started looking better. I started picking up a few small rubs here and there, nothing big, but, rubs can be deceiving. We've talked about that 100 times on here. Big rubs can oftentimes be made by small deer, and small rubs can sometimes be made by big deer. So it wasn't like those were any telltale signs, but I felt good because it was showing me and telling me that there had been bucks in that area. So I kind of kept walking. I got to this point, not a point literally, but I got to a spot within the swamp where it didn't really open up, because the whole thing is pretty congested. It's either high stem count and briery, nasty stuff, or it kind of turns into this grassy, kind of marshy kind of stuff with a few trees in, but it's still pretty high, and it's a 4-foot world, so deer feel really good, and they got plenty of side cover. And then every so often you get like a pocket of hardwoods or whatever. And this particular pocket that I got into had an oak in the middle of it, and it was dropping a white oak tree that was dropping acorns. And so as I was standing there, I was thinking to myself, I was like, you know what, if I'm going to come in here and hunt this, any of the stuff that I looked at to this point, if I'm trying to find a buck, I'd probably hunt back here, because I've seen a few rubs, a few small rubs. And this is this lone acorn tree that's in the middle of this nastiness that feels like it's an oasis out in the middle of the ocean as far as a deer would be concerned. And about the time I thought that, I took a couple steps forward and picked my head up as I was kind of looking on the ground at the acorns, because I was really kind of searching to see if there had any scrapes had been laid down there anywhere. I picked my head up and looked, and sure enough, there stands the deer that I've been trying, one of the two deer on that particular piece that I've been trying to kill. And he's standing in some green briars, just kind of browsing. We saw each other at the same time, and he took off. Now, don't want to make a habit of bumping deer like this, but at this point, I was in a position of I need to just figure some stuff out, and if that meant I had to get in and kick some deer around a little bit to do it, then I need to do it, and then I'll figure it out afterwards. But now I know that they're in there. I know that they're on that side of the piece, and so I felt good about that spot. So I hung a camera there, marked it on my map, and was like, all right, this is going to be a place I'll potentially come back to. And then continue to walk. I had a great wind. That was the one nice thing about the hunt, is I did have a northish wind, which was working to my advantage. What I'm presuming why I was able to get so close to him is because I think when I saw him, he was maybe 15 yards away or so. Had a wind blowing directly in my face, so it helped me, to kind of sneak up on him, I guess, and get a visual of him, which was good. So I had proof of life. I had a visual of the deer that I actually want to hunt, or one of the 2 deer that I wanted to kill, and was feeling good. But I wanted to continue to press back into the swamp and see what else was back there. And I got to another area where you start to actually, the area that I hunt a lot is really, really flat. And I think I talked about this in a previous podcast. I don't get a lot of topography change. And this actually has like one small bit of topography change. And then I saw a bunch more buck sign in there, that basically a bunch more rubs, again, smaller rubs, but I'm seeing, buck sign at this point. So I'm feeling good about it. And then this had a couple more oaks that were dropping. And so I felt good about that spot. So I marked that spot as well. And it kind of was on the transition, or just as this little elevation piece kind of occurred, it's on the roll on the downside of like this little knob essentially. And as I scouted the top rim of the knob, there were some more rubs up there, and there were some historical rubs that were up there as well. Pressed further back in and got kind of toward the end of the swampy area, and I found a buck bed with some more rubs, some trees that were broken off, and a clear bed that was at the point of that swamp. So that hiking mission was pretty good, because I found 3 potential setups, 2 that are dropping acorns, which I feel really good about, and saw more deer sign on that side of the property than I'd seen on the entire other side. I mean, I don't think, well, I know for sure I haven't seen a rub that I could remember, and I haven't seen a scrape at all on the other side. So that was good. So I felt good walking out of there. I felt like I have at least now a game plan to try to get into some deer. If nothing else, I feel like I could hunt the front piece of that, where I saw all the really heavy browse. Bunch of deer trails through there too. They're really defined and easy to see based on kind of how wet it is. Similarly to what I talked about in the previous swamp, where the water had receded and opened up a lot more travel opportunities for the deer on that piece. The same thing is true on this piece. I feel like what they're traveling right now and using as cover, historically in the past in wetter years, was probably not as habitable. Like, so they would be able maybe travel through there, but they certainly wouldn't be able to bed in there based on the water levels being up. And you can clearly see where water had been, when the levels are up, where it kind of stops and where it starts. So that was that piece. So I felt pretty good about that. Jumped in the truck, grabbed a bite to eat, and went over. Planned to go over to the new piece. So I spent so much time scouting that piece that I didn't make it to the other piece to do any scouting, but I knew where I kind of wanted to go. And I talked about this before. And this, again, is a public piece that's new to me. And this was the first hunt I threw at it. I did a scout/hunt 2-ish weeks ago. I think I talked about, found this little oak grove that I run onto that was near some, an edge of what looked to be, clear cut, maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. Everything's about head high ish, but still that briary kind of nasty mess that hasn't grown up super, super thick. And I don't think that it will. It's just not the habitat for it. Like, you're not going to get like, jungle kind of thick stuff. I mean, it's thick, don't get me wrong, but it's more of that briary kind of thick, and not necessarily thick with super small trees. And there's a handful of trees that are, tall enough to climb and get into, kind of sparsely placed throughout it. So it's clear that they did a select cut when they came in there. So in this oak grove, there's what I presume past that brush and past all that kind of old, select cut, is what I presume to be some bedding on the bottom side. That's on the west side of it. There's a stream that runs down there, and I talked about it. And that's where I presumed, I thought to myself, if I were a mature deer, whether it be a doe or a buck, but obviously hoping a buck, if I were a mature deer and a mature buck on that piece, the one place I could go would be in that area, because it's the furthest from the access. It's the longest walk. And you'd probably get bothered the least by people and or other deer if you were down there. So I made my way back in there. It's a little bit of a hike. And so my debate was whether I push into the brush and nasty stuff toward where I think the bedding is, or to hang out in that oak flat, or that little oak grove where there's a bunch of acorns dropping, and see if I can't catch something kind of coming to transition as it's headed to an ag field and wants to hit that little opening there where they still have a lot of side cover, a lot of security cover, but they got some great, food there, of course. So as I got in there and started kind of looking around, and the other thing that I thought of, I was like, this would be a great spot, to see rubs and or scrapes, because it just feels like you see a spot, you walk into it, and you just get like a sense of like, there's going to be deer here. So when I walked in there and was trying to figure out where I might set up and if I was going to walk into the brush or not, I saw 3 scrapes that had been opened up. And when I say opened up, like they looked fresh, like within the past 24 hours fresh. Like you could still see where the dirt was kind of wafted up from like pawing or whatever. So it wasn't smashed down. We had rain recently, and I don't remember what day it rained. So it was after that, which meant it couldn't have been any older than 2 days. But the way the ground looked, it looked like it was maybe 24 hours old. So this part of PA, you can do a little, you can use some lure. So I used a little lure of Clint and relieved myself into one of the scrapes, just as a little omen of good luck, maybe maybe the deer gods would shine down on me. And I found a killer tree to get into, climbed into the tree, was set up, sat, didn't see a single deer all night, which wasn't surprising. I felt like I was either going to see a good deer or I was going to probably see no deer just based on the setup. Had a perfect wind for it, had a west wind, was bulletproof in the setup I was in. And I lost shooting light. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and climb down. I can't see my pin any longer. Can't make an ethical shot. So I packed up my stuff and I was like, I'm going to try to boogie out of here as quickly as I can because, no harm, no foul. Nothing knows I'm there. And I feel like I know what my game plan would be next. Even though I didn't see anything, I still felt good about the overall hunt. Well, I pulled my platform off and I'm climbing down, pull my first stick off. I'm standing on my second stick and I hear brush crash to me from my left. So the way I was set up, I had a trail running basically from my right shoulder, from behind my right shoulder, right basically, maybe at 5 yards. So not the best opportunity to take a shot there. But the way the wind was blowing with that west wind, and it was just like an off west wind a little bit, where like I was basically going to get a deer if they came out that trail. I was going to get probably a 10-yard shot before they caught my scent stream. And if it was a good deer, I would have enough time. I would have the opportunity to make a shot because there's nothing between me and them except air and opportunity. And they'd be coming from cover right out past me. So there would be no chance. They would almost be past me at that point before they would ever get beyond cover. So I thought that as long as there wasn't a deer coming out, a lead deer followed by a buck, if a lead deer comes out, I'm probably screwed. But that was the chance I was willing to take just based on how bulletproof the setup was. What I was really hoping for was for a buck to come from my left to come out of the brush to any of those scrapes. Because when I set up, the furthest scrape was 30 yards. Unfortunately, I had to have a shot to it once I got up in my tree because there was a branch in the way, and I'm on public, so I can't trim. And the second scrape was to my left at about, my 10 o'clock maybe, and it was at 20 yards, and there was a scrape in front of me at about 10 yards, 10, 12 yards. That was at about my 1 o'clock. And so I had a couple shot opportunities, and I felt good about those, and I was willing to take the risk on the trail coming from directly behind me. So as I'm climbing down, I'm on my second step or my second stick, and I hear some crashing off to the left of me. Not super loud crashing, just like something moving through the brush. And I look over, and out popped a deer. And I think I talked about this in a previous podcast, but there were 2 deer on this particular piece that I had on camera that were shooters for me in this area. One was a shooter 8 and one was a shooter 9. And it was one of those 2. I could see the frames. So I could kind of tell, that it was probably one of those 2, but I couldn't quite make out, every time to kind of tally up whether it was the 8 or the 9. Body size says 3.5-year-old all day long. Those both on camera were 3.5-year-old deer. So I felt good about what I was seeing. And he came out, hit the scrape that was 30 yards away, worked the licking branch, pawed at the scrape a little bit, moved over to the second scrape, the one that would have been 20 yards away. Meanwhile, I'm still standing on my stick, just trying not to move, just standing there. He comes over to that second scrape, the one that I freshened up, and hit the licking branch on that, pawed at the ground, and then he took a leak in that one, and then he went just to the side of that, maybe like a foot away, and ripped up the ground again and made his own scrape, pissed in that one, then went to the other scrape that was the one that was closest to me, and hit the licking branch on that one and potted that one and tore up the ground on that one too, and then made his way off. So all in all, it was like 10 to 15 minutes I was stuck on my second stick, just hanging out, waiting for him to do his duty and beat it so I could get out of there. So that was super cool to see that and reaffirmed or confirmed what I thought as far as like where I thought a mature deer was bedded. So what's the game plan going forward is really look for another west wind. I feel like I know where he's bedded. Based on the time that he came out, it was about 6:45. So I probably missed him with enough shooting light to take a shot at around 6:30 ish. Probably is what I'm feeling like. So I'm thinking I just need to cut the distance between where he's bedded and where I'm set up. So my first intuition was right to probably get into the brushy stuff, but I just wasn't 100% sure. That was the right move to make in that particular moment, on the hunt Saturday afternoon. So I think what I need to do is when I checked it on X, I was looking at the line distance, and basically from where he came out to where I think he's bedded is about 150 yards. And that makes sense. So if he would have got up probably about 5:30 to start moving, probably would have took him, an hour and some change to maybe make it that 150-ish yards. If he got up right at 5:30, that's a reasonable amount of time during daylight for a buck to meander around, do some nibbling, stay in cover right as it's hitting dark and then pop out. So I figure in looking at the terrain there, that brush, that thick stuff kind of goes for about 60 yards, 65 yards ish, and then kind of creates another transition line of that brush where it kind of opens up into hardwood before it goes down a little bit and you start headed toward a creek bottom. And so that I think is where I'm going to set up, because I think I'm still probably 70 yards away from his bed, the two bedding areas that I think he's probably using. And if he's taking the same route, it should buy me that maybe 30 minutes of daylight that I need to try to stick an arrow in him. So all in all, no buck was killed on Saturday. But I learned a ton about both properties and feel like if I can get the right wind conditions and stuff like that, I'll have a good opportunity on either piece. The only downside is that I'm losing days here in Pennsylvania, at least for October, as I'm leaving for Iowa on like the 31st of October, and I'll be gone for the entire rut and be back around the 17th. So I can hit it again around here, around the 17th, 18th, and so on until the end of the year. But who knows what happens between now and then with rut and pressure and whatever the case might be. So I'm hoping that I get a decent wind to hunt either one of those areas in the next 2 weeks and see what happens. And then just quickly, I hit the swamp on Sunday and did a little scouting, just because it's been giving me fits and the water has receded way back, and there's all kinds of deer trails where there wasn't deer trails last year, all kinds of browse pressure. Hung 2 new cameras in those locations, or in that one location, and then found a scrape. I set up a cell camera on a scrape. And then I did a little scout to the back side of the property, because the food source that was back there last year, there wasn't one. It was a hay field. And this year it's a cornfield. So I hiked my way back there to see what was going on, if there was any sign that was back there that would tell me that maybe that was a better spot. I ended up kicking a buck out of a bed, found his bed. It was still warm. He was bedded about 50 yards away from an oak tree that was dropping acorns. It's one of the few oaks in that area that would be dropping, or one of the few oaks, or let me put it this way. One of the few areas that has acorns in that entire swamp that I've found to this point. So it's a prime piece of real estate. So mark that. I'll probably hunt closer to that. Truth be told, that area is probably only 60 yards away from where I've been set up, but it's just thick enough and far enough away from where I've set up in the past that deer can move back and forth from his bed to that tree and eat, and I would never have a clue, and would likely never hear him, because it's all grassy and super quiet in that area. So that was basically my whitetail weekend. So good intel on all 3 properties, and a really good encounter on another one. So we'll wait for the right weather conditions and try to give it hell, and hopefully I'll be able to get out this weekend, or late this week when we get that cold front. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get moving on to today's show. Have a cool show for you. This is a gentleman that I started following recently on Instagram. Super good dude. His name is Jake Bush. He is from Ohio. I was following him earlier this year, and the dude is just a grinder. He's using beast tactics, so it's a lot of you guys can relate to the way he's hunting. He's hunting southern Ohio, so I'm sure a lot of you out there can probably relate to that as well, and some gnarly terrain. But the cool thing was that the dude put in a ton of miles this year, and he just has a cool story about just kind of pushing his, and you'll know what I mean whenever you hear, it from his mouth, I guess. He kind of pushed all of his chips to the center and is following his whitetail passion. And that kind of is what, it's kind of what kind of, I guess, moved him to move to Ohio. And this year he was rewarded with a killer deer, 190 inches of public land public land monarch. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get Jake Bush on and get started. As always, thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I have a gentleman on who I was following on Instagram, and I had been following him for a little while, kind of, watching what he had going on. I saw some trail camera pulls, some pics that kind of intrigued me. And I think you actually even had on maybe even an Exodus hat, if I'm not mistaken, in one of them. I think that's maybe what caught my eye initially. But then as I was following, we had the opening part of the season kicked off here in PA and, of course, in Ohio as well. And I happened to see a picture of a large deer down that was taken on public land. And I was like, man, I got to talk to this guy and get the story. And I'm talking to Jake Bush. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. How you doing, man?
I'm doing okay, man. Has it all sunk in yet? How you feeling a couple days post kill?
You know what? It took a couple days, but it's finally starting to sink in a little bit. At first, it was shell shock, obviously, and
right,
and just celebrating with friends and family and everything like that. But yeah, it's the more I look at pictures and kind of replay the story in my head and edit this film, it's definitely coming to life for me.
Nice, yeah. So so how much celebration went on? Was it a couple days worth of celebration?
Yeah, it was actually pretty crazy. So I was actually hunting a piece of public that didn't have any cell service, and I was roughly a mile in, and I drove to the nearest town and called my buddy in West Virginia in Wheeling, and he called off work the next day and drove straight down there. By the time that I had the deer about 3/4 of the way out of the forest, he met me and helped me pull it the rest of the way.
Nice. That's awesome.
So that was pretty exciting. Yep. And then I called my brother and my dad as well, and they drove down from New York 6 hours and met me at my apartment that night. So nice. It was a blast.
That's when you know you got a good deer, man. When you have people driving hours to come help you drag, you either one have a great deer down or really good buddies, or both. And in this instance, you have both, I think. So
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
So before we jump into, all the, the background of this deer and stuff like that and get to the overall story, if you wouldn't mind, just give me a little bit of background about you, where you're from, what you do for a living.
Yep, of course. So the name's Jake Bush. I am from a little small town in southwestern New York. I grew up there for 18 years. I grew up hunting and fishing and spending time outdoors with friends and family. I was introduced into hunting from basically my grandfather and my dad at a young age. I just remember them bringing home bucks in the back of the truck when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, and I couldn't get enough of it. I got my first bow when I was 4 years old, and I've just been consistently shooting pretty much every day since then, and it's just been an addiction.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yep. So at 18, I joined the service, and I lived out west. I lived in Montana for 3 years actually, and that was absolutely amazing. But life had bigger plans for me, and I moved back to New York for a few years. And that was short lived. And then I decided, you know what, it was just time to chase some dreams. And I ended up in Southern Ohio. I'm an electrician by trade. So I found a company that would allow me to work 12-hour shifts, 2, 3, 4 days a week. So I would have more time off to hunt and lots of vacation time. So that's where I'm at.
Dude, that's a good find, man. You always got to find I think, when folks, go to find a job, I think that's a good point to make, man. It's like, you got to kind of figure out what's going to make you happy. You know what I mean? And, it's not necessarily always chasing the dollar or whatever the case is. I'm pretty lucky where I work in a somewhat stressful environment, or, industry, I guess you could say, with a lot of responsibility and stuff like that. But, the people that I do work for are super cool and understanding. So, for example, on Friday, I was like, hey, cold front hit. I'm going to leave, I'm going to take a half day on Friday. And, the guy who owns the company, I was like, oh, what are you going to do? I was like, I'm going to go try to kill a deer. And he was like, oh. I was like, all right, cool. And so then he texted me later. He's like, I was following your Instagram stories while you were hunting, so, whenever.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I don't quite have the flexibility as you, only because it's a marketing and advertising. So it's like, we're always kind of on. So it's like, I don't have the ability to work those 12, extended days to put my time in, because it's really just when the client needs things is when I kind of have to be available. But, I do have, unlimited PTO. So I'm able to take, long trips if I want to, and take a few days off here and there when cold fronts hit, which I didn't always have the ability to do in the past, is, to chase those weather patterns and stuff like that. So I now have a little bit more ability to do that. So I know you mentioned, you come from like a hunting family and stuff like that. So talk to me a little bit how you kind of got started. I mean, did you start the traditional way of, living in New York? I'm assuming you probably did a lot of small game hunting to start whenever you first got your license and kind of started getting into the timber in a real way.
Yep, of course. So, it started for me just obviously squirrel hunting and rabbit hunting and things like that a little bit. And we were always big fishermen as well. It quickly evolved into turkey season. We'd go out in the springtime and chase gobblers around, and that was just an absolute blast as a kid. And then it evolved into kind of just following my grandpa and my dad around on deer season. And basically, if they were in the woods, I was going to be in the woods with them. It started to consume me at a young age, and I would go out there and freeze right next to them. And I just remember nights where we'd be out there and sleet and freezing rain in late October, and never seeing a deer, but I couldn't get enough of it.
Right.
But yeah, that's pretty much how I got started.
And then when did you pick up a bow and really start, like, I mean, not just pick up a bow, but when was it that you kind of got the bug for bow hunting specifically?
I've shot my bow since I was 4, obviously, and did just tons of target practice every day. I mean, I'd shoot hundreds of arrows sometimes, and I'm a competitive person by nature, and my grandpa kind of caught on to that. And so we would have competitions, and he just brought me up just shooting all the time. And so in New York, when I first could get my license, it was 16 years old. I believe it's changed now, but so at 16, I remember I got my license on my birthday, and the next day I went out and I shot a 115-inch 8-point, which back home is a pretty big deer.
That's a good deer. Yeah, and for sure. Yeah.
Yep. That was the start of the addiction for me. I remember just putting my hands on that deer, and it was like, man, this is what I need to do.
Right. It's like, yeah, I remember that first time. It's like, there's not much, I don't know if there's a cooler feeling than that. You know what I mean? It's, I don't know. It's still, even when I'm in a stand now, or I'm in a tree now, it's even when a doe walks by, I get excited. It doesn't.
Oh yeah, I'm the same.
It doesn't have to be a buck. It doesn't have to be a big buck or whatever. I was out Saturday, a little spike came through, and I watched him and I filmed him for like 5 minutes. And like when I first saw him, it's like, I mean, immediately I know that I'm not even picking up my bow. You know what I mean? But it was just like, the adrenaline rush happened, and I was like, in that moment, you just kind of think about, man, there's not much. I don't know if there's anything much cooler than this out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Hard pressed to find it. But so I want to talk to you a little bit about, you grew up in New York hunting. Now, of course, and then you were in Montana, which talk about hunting mecca. Living out there, it's a great place to hunt, especially for anyone who's into the outdoors, even outside of hunting. But now you're living in Southern Ohio. So talk to me a little bit about the terrain in New York that you grew up kind of hunting, and how that kind of compares to the terrain that you're usually, getting into in Southern Ohio.
Yep. So the area of New York I'm from is rolling timber for the most part, and lots of ag. There's a few marshes and swamps around, but for the majority of it, it's just rolling hills, ag land. Growing up, for the most part, I hunted with my grandpa, and we just hunted, the basic field edges, and one little patch of timber with a leeward ridge on it that was pretty good during the rut, but I didn't know why it was good at the time.
Right.
But yeah, mainly ag, so it's a lot different than where I'm hunting now.
Okay, and so I guess describe to me a little bit what the terrain is like in Southern Ohio. Like, is it? I've been to different parts of Southern Ohio to hunt. So I've been into like the way far south Southern Ohio, which you start to get into like, that West Virginia type mountainous terrain. You know what I mean? Where it kind of converges with Kentucky, Ohio, and West Virginia, where they all kind of meet somewhat. And then I've been more what people refer to Southern Ohio, which is more centralish, where you get into like, you'll have some steep ridges that are near some rivers and around some river bottoms and stuff like that. But you definitely get more into like the rolling hill ag country. The other further south was more, big woods was my experience. So where are you? And I don't need to know like GPS coordinates necessarily, but like, what's that terrain look like?
Yep, of course. So I've actually got, as far as hunting goes, I've got a weird little thing I do. I basically will go around to just about every piece of state land in the entire state and scout them and pick out a couple good bedding locations that I think would be decent for a hunt. So for the most part, consistently, I would say that I'm more like down south Southern Ohio. So it's the big timber and the big hills, and the big ridges with good cuts and draws and things like that. I do have some public CRP fields that I hunt. I hunt a marsh or two. river bottoms, basically any piece of public that I can get my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
But I definitely prefer at this point to be down in the hills.
Nice.
It's just my comfort zone.
Right. Yeah. It's I've been having a bit of a learning curve the past few. I mean, I grew up in, South Central Pennsylvania, teetering on the western side. I'm more, put it this way, I'm a Steeler fan, not an Eagles fan. Like it's like, so as far as like geography goes. So I grew up more hunting hills and stuff like that, but now I live around Philadelphia where there's, I'm now hunting a lot more kind of swamps and stuff like that, which has been a big learning curve for me just because, I was used to picking out, setups based on terrain features and stuff like that, which I could clearly see on a map. And it was really easy to kind of see whenever I was scouting. Now where I look at a map and it's like the entire thing's flat. There's no,
what I
mean? Or there's just like a slight variation, like a slight bit of an elevation that's going to stay dry, and you don't really see that unless you're walking it. And so I've gotten more apt at trying to find habitat features versus terrain features in those locations that are going to kind of drive or funnel deer or be an edge that a deer are going to want to use or whatever the case is. So I'm kind of aligned with you, man. It's like if I can find a place that has some has some hills to work with or some elevation to work with, then, that's essentially what I want to, what I'm going to kind of prefer. So I want to get to this deer specifically, I guess walk me through what type of terrain you were kind of focusing on with this deer specifically. Like, was there a funnel that you were looking into? Was there some type of saddle that you kind of were starting to look at a little bit that you thought might hold some really good deer or might, or that might funnel deer in a particular area that you would have a good opportunity to set up on? Just kind of talk to me through that a little bit.
Yep, of course. So, growing up, I was kind of just hunting ag fields and stuff like that, like I mentioned before. And so I didn't really have any concept of scouting. I actually learned beast scouting last year, and I've always been a really hardcore hunter before that. But when I learned that and when I found my first bed, things took off. I mean, I just became so addicted to the whole idea of scouting and thermals and wind and all these different things that you've had him on your show. Dan Insfault just kind of alludes to. And I mean, he's just been, basically my mentor, and I've never actually talked to the guy, but I've researched everything I could possibly find on him and kind of put it to use. So as far as terrain goes down there, I would say I basically was looking for leeward ridges in general, and then points that would come off those ridges. So any sort of ridge that looks like it might have a flat on the end of it, or a really good military crest, or just really good cover from clear cuts, I would go investigate. And I didn't really have anything specific that I was looking for. I would just put boots on the ground. I mean, hundreds of miles this summer of just boots on the ground. And I've kicked up some slammer bucks.
Nice.
And I just kind of decided, you know what, I'm going to get in there. I'm going to mess things up. I'm going to get my feet dirty and my hands dirty. And I'm just going to try to just find these deer and figure them out as good as possible.
Right.
This one specifically was actually in a thermal hub. And there's a leeward ridge that borders ag fields. The ag fields are private, and there's a creek that separates them, and the public goes right down to that creek. And so my whole concept of this was there's 4 or 5 really good ridges that meet in a thermal hub in the bottom. And so all I wanted to do was get in there and just check that hub. I went in actually 2.5 weeks ago to check that hub for the first time, and I found just absolutely shredded rubs about, mid-waist high. I found probably 30 scrapes in a 200-yard area, and it was just tore up.
Wow.
And so I decided that there was beds nearby. And then I just decided to walk one of those ridges on the way out, and I jumped a huge buck, which very well could have been the buck that I shot.
Right.
And I just decided, you know what, when I got the right wind in a couple of weeks, I was going to go back and give it a chance.
Nice. That's awesome, man. Yeah. I mean, Dan is, I would say he's been a big help to a lot of folks unknowingly to put them on some big deer in the past. I credited him in one of the last podcasts I had him on where I kind of used some of his teachings, and it's funny you mentioned that whenever you started kind of diving into that approach to hunting is like when things kind of took off. And I was in a similar kind of situation where, growing up hills, but was also hunting predominantly ag and stuff like that. And then when I found him, same type of thing. My first trip to Ohio, I was hunting near this river, and ended up setting up on this, leeward side of this ridge, and I saw the most insane rut activity that I've ever seen in my life. And
Yep.
I blew an opportunity at a nice deer on the second day of the hunt. Well, I ended up finding, similar to you, I found a bunch of rubs and a bunch of scrapes, and I was like, you know what? And that was all on the bottom. And I was thinking back to like stuff I'd heard Dan talk about. And I was like, man, all right. I was like, this sign's on the bottom. It's probably all made at night. I was like, but that means there's good deer in the area. I was like, so I'm going to go to the top of this ridge, and the top of that ridge was just all tore up with rubs up there as well. So I just kind of came down over the leeward side of it. And that was where I set up. And I was bulletproof for wind, man. It's like I've hunted that 2 different years, saw bucks every year. And I was bulletproof for wind. Like, it didn't matter what direction deer came from. They were not catching my scent at all. Like, I don't know. I'm just in like this little magic spot, I guess. I don't know how to describe it. And I blew an opportunity on a really good deer the second day. And then the third day is when I killed the deer that I ended up tagging. And it was basically because of, stuff I heard, from him. And I was like, I told him, I was like, man, I've got to buy you a bottle of whiskey or something for that. I was like, cause I don't know that would have happened, or I even would have found that spot if it wasn't for, him and, the things that he talks about, finding sign, being able to interpret it, and then, starting to understand how to set up on it. So it sounds like you didn't even realize this deer existed specifically. It sounded like you were kind of taking that method of beast hunting where you were like, let's go find some deer sign, and then let's figure out the best scenario to hunt that particular terrain feature. Is that about right?
Yeah. The deer specifically, no, I didn't know he was there. I did have pictures of some really good 10 points on camera, probably 150-inch 10 points there, and pretty much all around Southern Ohio. I mean, I've got 13 cameras out, and I've probably got pictures of 40 bucks total, and I bet 15 of them are over 140 inches. It's just insane. But,
nice.
But yeah, it was kind of the same situation as you explained. And honestly, I mean, without Dan, I wouldn't have killed that deer. There's no way.
Right. So, was there, so let me ask it this way. So you found a bunch of sign, you kicked up a big deer, right? And you're like, okay, this area is holding good deer, a good deer, 3 good deer, any number of good deer, but there's good deer there in general. Was there a terrain feature specifically in that area? Like, after you kind of found the deer or a deer and you found good sign, was there anything in that area where you were like, all right, these start to look like places that might be good interception points or
yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Yep. So as I was, basically I found that big scrape line a couple weeks ago. And so I decided I had the perfect wind. I had a southwest wind, and it was roughly 13 or 15 miles an hour that day. And I remember looking at the wind at like 10 in the morning, and I texted my buddy. I said, hey, I'm swinging for the fences. I'm going for it. My whole reasoning for even walking up that hub, which I normally wouldn't do, was the fact that I thought the wind would blow hard enough where my thermals wouldn't rise up to his bed. Mm-hmm. And so I crossed the creek, and it took me probably 3 hours to go the next 3/4 of a mile.
Wow.
And every time the wind would blow hard, I'd take a step, and I walked up through the creek up the hub a little bit further, and I finally hit an oak flat. And when I hit that oak flat, there was a bunch of rubs and a huge scrape right underneath it. And I knew right away, I mean, I was probably 20 yards away from it. I knew that's where I have to be. That was on the actual ridge out of like the 4 or 5 ridges. That was the one ridge that I thought that buck would be better there with the wind direction. And from where I bumped that buck before, I knew it was roughly 70 to 100 yards away from where he should be bedded. Right. And my whole mentality behind it was, the whole purpose of trying to find beds like that, from what I've got from Dan anyways, is that should be where the biggest buck is bedded. Right. It might be a 140, it might be a 160, it might be a 190, but that should be the biggest buck, because he'll have that primary spot.
Right.
And I spent about a half hour trying to set up my stand, and finally got up in there, and the rest played out about perfect.
Nice. So talk to me a little bit. So when you found his bed, did you specifically find the bed that he was laying in, or did you just find his general bedding area?
No, I found a specific bed. I actually just got right down into it and picked a bunch of hair out of it. It was still warm after I busted him out of there. And I kind of I crawled in his bed, and I kind of looked around and saw, how far can this deer see from up here? And it was pretty thick, and he could see probably 40 yards. I would say that his hearing was probably the best thing that he had going for him up there. And obviously, if anybody came from the backside of that ridge, he'd just run down across that hub.
Right.
But yeah, that was definitely the biggest bet in there that I found that day.
Right. So you said, you got the wind that you wanted. I think you said it was a southwest wind. You were like, I'm going to swing for the fences. Was there anything in particular aside from that wind condition that you were waiting for? Because I know there was a nice temp change here recently that happened. Were you, of course, following that? What did you get the temp change that the rest of the, that Pennsylvania got? Were you looking for, the barometric pressure to change? Was there anything there that you were kind of looking at to kind of try to align all the factors or as many of them as you could?
Nope. Actually, I've got so many spots scouted out with really big deer that I just decided that when I get the right wind for a certain spot, I'm just going to go hunt it. And I took a week of vacation this week from work. So I had 7 days to just bounce around to 7 of what I thought were really good early season bedding spots.
Nice.
So it was last Wednesday and it was 93 degrees outside, had a southwest wind. It was muggy. It was nasty. And I just, like I said, I crawled in there and he came down off that ridge at 3:30 in the afternoon to hit that scrape and eat acorns. It was just the most magical thing I've ever experienced.
It was like you almost drew it up, right?
Yeah, it couldn't have played out any better. Honestly, when I heard the first stick crack and I looked up at 3:30, I was still filming B-roll at the time. I was only in my stand for 45 minutes. I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And the rest was just the next 10 minutes were just absolutely crazy.
Right. So whenever you're going in and this deer or a good deer's in the area, right? And you were just talking about the weather conditions, like they weren't great, but you were determined. You took time off, and so you were like, I'm just going to hunt the best spots I have for that wind each day, and let the cards kind of fall with where they may. You're walking in and you're saying it's like 93 degrees. I'm sure you're sweating, stinking. You know what I mean? Did you have any thought? Was there any thought in the back of your mind where you were just like, because I know I have this sometimes on certain hunts when I'm walking in, I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, you know what I mean? Where I'm just like, this couldn't possibly be a worse scenario. I couldn't draw up a worse scenario. Did you have any thoughts like that going in, or were you just like, you know what, we're just gonna go for it?
I was really just dead set on getting in there and going for it. And I remember when I got out of my Jeep, I told myself that deer is there. He's in that bed. Get it together, get focused, and get in there as quiet as possible and get set up. And even if he's not there, I feel like that's the way you have to approach every hunt you go on.
Right.
You just have to, if you're not confident that there's a deer there, why are you even out there?
Right.
Aside from the rut's different, but as far as early season bedding goes, but no, the whole way in, I had milkweed and I was just checking the wind. And the one thing that would have held me off is if my thermals would have rised up one of those ridges, but the thermals were actually pretty much steady, and the wind was blowing all of my milkweed right back out behind me down the center of that cut. So it couldn't have played out any better for wind. I was sweating like crazy, and I'm sure that I was not smelling the best either, but I decided, you know what? I have a chance to get in here when he is really not expecting it. He probably thinks that the thermals are still rising, that he's safe, and I'm going to be able to sneak past him and get in there.
Right. Now, do you do anything particularly for like scent control or anything like that? Are you a scent control freak in general, or do you just kind of throw that in, I don't want to say caution into the wind, but just mainly plan to play the wind and don't worry too much about scent control otherwise?
So growing up, I went through a stage where I was definitely crazy about scent control. I turned into a fanatic about it. Packed my clothes away and did all the things. And, I'd throw pine in my bag and all these different scent covers and things like that. And I would still get busted. No matter how hard I tried, I would still get busted by mature does and mature bucks.
Right.
And so I just decided, and Dan was a huge influence to that as well. Just, you know what? Just go out there and play the wind. Just act like that deer. Act like there's no way you can beat that deer's nose.
Right.
And so, I try to mitigate my scent as much as possible. But
right.
I don't do any scent sprays. I wash my clothes in scent-free detergent just because that's good practice. But no, there's really no scent control at all. It's all based off wind. I give a mature buck tons of credit as far as his nose goes. I don't think there's any way that you could possibly beat his nose.
Yeah, no. I tend to agree. It's like I kind of fall somewhere in the, I guess, the middle ground of it. I still, I keep stuff in a scent-free tote and stuff like that, and I try to practice as good a scent control as I possibly can. But had too many scenarios where, the wind shifted on me and no matter what I did, it didn't matter. Like I got busted, you know what I mean? For whatever reason, right? It's, I think that's the hardest thing of hunting, right? And I think this is something that you kind of start to figure out as you're kind of talking about, where it's like you find some guys who are good mentors, whether you know them personally or whether you know them just digitally or whatever, and you listen to what they say, because they're speaking from years and years of experience, that they've seen this stuff play out over and over again. And one of the things that I kind of took away and finally started practicing this year, it's like I'm probably a little bit hard-headed, but there was a deer particularly that I was trying to hunt this year, or still trying to hunt. And I'm pretty sure that I heard him on Saturday. I got the right wind. I went and I hunted him. And I heard some light sparring, I heard some grunting and stuff like that. And it didn't sound like a young deer, that was doing the grunting. And so he ended up not making his way to me, but I put a hunt on him for him. Here where I live, special regs units come in like mid-September. So I was able to hunt him, pretty early. And I put one other hunt on for him. And I had a good wind up until about 8:30, 9 o'clock. And then all of a sudden the wind switched. And in years past, I would have just gutted it out and waited. But this year it's like the wind switched. I gave it a couple minutes to see if it was just the wind switched for like a minute and then it was going to switch back to the prevailing wind. And it stayed steady in the wrong direction. So instead of like sitting there trying to gut it out, I just pulled my stuff and hopped out. And that was it. I was like, if the wrong wind, I was like, it doesn't matter if he shows up or not. I was like, he's never going to get close enough for me to get a shot opportunity. So instead of boogering things up and killing it for a later hunt, let me just make the smart play and bust out of there. And that was what I did, so it's,
I think that's really important.
Yeah. Cause it's like, there's been too many times where it's like, I would push the envelope because it's like, I'm off, or I wasn't even off that day. I was just catching a hunt before work that morning. And there have been years, in the past years, I might have stayed and tried to gut that hunt out and try to see if I couldn't, pull it off. But now I've just had too many times where I've played that, bad wind trying to make something happen and ended up, hurting my chances, later in the year. That's not to say that you don't play an off wind, right? Because I mean, you hear, even guys like Dan or whoever, like they'll talk about playing that off wind. And actually, that's a good question. Like the wind that you had, like, were you giving him the wind, or were you kind of playing that off wind where he thought he kind of, I mean, I know you were talking about the thermals and kind of how you were playing those, but as far as the wind was concerned, did he get a sense, or would he have had a sense that he had the wind and that you were almost wrong, or did he pretty much have the wind to his disadvantage the entire time?
I mean, I think that he thought he had the wind to his advantage the entire time, because he did have wind to back. It was the perfect ridge for the southwest wind. And the only thing that I think that I beat him on was the fact that, normally you would come in over top of him and try to play the just off wind. Mm-hmm. The fact that I came in from below him when he thought that he would have got that thermal pull up to him, they're expecting that thermal pull. Mm-hmm. And just by some chance, that draw, the way it sets up, if the wind blows right, it doesn't pull up the ridge. It sends all your wind out across the creek in the cornfield. So it was just, I 100% believe he thought he had wind to back. He thought he had thermals. And the way I set up on the ridge would have been a just off thermal pull later in the night. Mm-hmm. If it got to that point and if the wind died down, but I didn't even he came out so early that it wouldn't have mattered.
Right. Now, did you wind check that spot like in advance, or is that just something you figured out as you were going up the ridge to get to your location, that as you were dropping milkweed, you had confirmed that was what the case was, or did you do some type of wind check prior to that?
Nope. I just thought it up in my head, and I thought, you know what, if I have a strong enough wind, there's the ridge behind it, the leeward ridge, isn't steep enough to where you'd get a real good thermal tunnel. I just thought that the way it's set up, it should flow down through there still like a prevailing wind would. And my whole point was to get in there and just keep, every 5 to 10 steps, check your wind and check the milkweed and see what it's doing. And if I would have had it rising up at any point, I probably would have backed out. But the fact that it just kept blowing right behind me, it just set up perfect.
Right. Nice. So I want to get to the hunt now. We kind of did all the background and stuff like that, and I want to start talking about how all this kind of came together. So we figured out you knew that there was a good deer in this area. We talked through like the wind setup, and we talked through the type of terrain that you were focusing on in this particular instance, your access, all those things. So start talking me through. You're in your tree now. You're set up. what's the first thing that you're kind of doing before he walks out? Like what are you kind of thinking through as you're getting ready to kind of really dive into your hunt?
Okay. So, I mean, at the bottom of the tree, I'll start there. I found that big scrape and the rub that was right underneath that white oak tree. And so I went to the nearest tree, and it was actually 3 red oaks that were combined. It was one trunk and they kind of split off. And I run in and salt, hang on and sticks. So I stood at the bottom of that tree for almost a half hour, and I just contemplated, should I be in this tree or should I be in one tree up the ridge further? And I went back and forth for the longest time, and I didn't want to move around to get my scent around or to cross a trail or anything like that. And finally I decided on that tree. And then it took me roughly, I knew bedding was really close, and in my mind there was a deer there. So it took me roughly 45 minutes to get set up. I got set up. I got my camera gear hung. I was doing as soon as I got up, I hung my camera and then I started checking my wind again with milkweed, and it was still pulling right down that valley perfect. And I decided at that point, you know what, I think I can make this work all night. The cooler it gets, the more that your wind's going to drift down off those ridges anyways.
Right.
And so at that point I just started filming B-roll, and I was in the stand for roughly 45 minutes. I just did my intro. I was doing, some focusing on leaves and then the background. It was a beautiful day, nice breeze. And that's when I heard that stick crack. And I looked over, and coming down the ridge, he was roughly 70 yards away at the time. And I could see antlers, and he's headed straight down the ridge, straight off his bed. And when he hit the scrape line coming in, which I walked, 20 feet below that scrape line, knowing that it was there, and just hoping that a deer would come straight down instead of where he came to. He hit that scrape line and turned towards the oak tree, which is in between me and him. And when he turned, I picked up my binoculars, and I look, and he's running full speed dead at me. And so I went into panic mode. I set my binoculars down. I was trying to grab my bow, trying to get the camera turned. I was trying to get it off manual focus into autofocus. He hit the oak tree, and he just came to a dead stop. He flicked his tail a couple times, and he started eating acorns right in front of me. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. There's no way that this is going to play out like this.
Wow.
And he milled around for a second. He came around a bush and started heading down the hill a little bit more, broadside at 30 yards. And I pre-ranged. What was that?
I was going to say, just hold on before we get there. So when he's running at you, like, give me your internal dialogue. Like, what was your mental state at that point?
I mean, so when he was coming down the ridge, I thought it was that, 145, 150 inch 10 point, which is just a slammer for me. So I was extremely pumped up. And when I picked up my binoculars and he started running at me, I saw his brow tines and all those points and stickers, and saw how big his frame was. And I just absolutely lost my mind. And I just, you can imagine, I've never seen a 190 inch deer, let alone a 190 inch deer running at me full speed at 70 yards.
Right.
And so, it was the biggest flurry. And all I remember is just get your bow in your hand and get the camera turned. And, it's kind of funny because as he was coming in, I got my bow ready. I got the camera turned. I put my release on my D-loop, and, I bumped my camera out of the way on accident. And I remember saying, like, forget the camera. This isn't a 140 inch deer. Forget about the camera. It doesn't matter.
Right.
And when I drew back on him, I don't know if I had my arm unlevel or something, but it swung into frame, and he centered in that frame perfect for the shot.
Man, it was like it was
a little bit. Yeah, it was a little bit out of focus because I was just absolutely losing my mind, but the way he just swung in there was perfect.
Nice. All right. So now he's running, and he's running at you. You recognize, the frame, that this is not, that 140 inch 10 point, albeit a killer deer, which, most anyone would probably stick an arrow in. And now you recognize this is like, let's be honest here. It's a once in a lifetime deer. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And he stops in front of you. Right. And now you're getting ready to do whatever's going to happen next. So walk me, I guess, kind of slowly through the next kind of phase of what was going on.
Yep. So when I decided that the camera didn't matter anymore, I just went and straight killer mode. I forgot about his antlers. I drew back, and I just laser focused on exactly where I needed to be. And I was just waiting for him to turn the rest of the way broadside. And, within a couple seconds, he turned broadside and I squeezed, and I don't know what happened, but he ducked like, probably 6 or 8 inches. And so I hit him a little high, and immediately all I thought was, oh no, I hit him a little high, but within 3 steps, there was blood everywhere, and he was just pumping. Within the next 20 yards, he hit the creek bed, and I heard him go up on the ridge on the other side, and it's a really steep cut. So he was probably only 40 yards away from me. And I heard, a couple thuds and then the big crash, and I knew he went down right there. And that's when it really set in for me. I mean, I was up there just shaking, holding on to my stand. I had to sit down, and I just lost my mind for about 10 good minutes.
So you're losing your mind. Like, what are you thinking about after that? Like, what's I understand like you're like losing it, but like, what are some of the thoughts that are going through your head? Like, cause it's one of those interesting things as like a bow hunter, that self-films or doesn't film at all. It's like, you're typically by yourself when this stuff happens. It's not like you're, goose hunting or elk hunting, even whenever you're usually with a buddy, elk hunting a lot of times or whatever, where it's like, you're just completely alone with your own thoughts in those moments. Right. So like, talk to me a little bit about like what was going through your mind then.
Yep. So, for me, my grandpa got me into hunting, and he passed last January, and I dedicated all last season to him, and I didn't end up killing a deer. And when season came around to an end, it really tore me up. And I just told myself, you know what, you got to work harder. You got to figure out something else. And that was about the time I found bee scouting and everything. But the first thought that came into my head, I remember just looking up the sky and just saying, like, Papa, we got him. We did it finally. And you're by yourself out there, like you said, and, you get lost in emotions. And I really thought about family and how I moved away from, the ones I loved to chase a dream, and sold my dream home and, quit my job on a whim and moved down here. And, I spend a lot of time alone now and just out scouting and doing the hunting thing, which I absolutely love. But it was a moment of reflection for me and just the past year in general, and how thankful I am for the journey that's came about.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride, but I couldn't be more happy.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And that's a great way to pay respect to someone that meant a lot to you. You know what I mean? In those moments too, when you're in this, in a tree by yourself, it gives you a lot of time to kind of think about what's important. And I'm glad you were able to have that experience, man. That's awesome. That it's interesting how you have these, magnificent moments of like personal achievement that actually then provides context for everything else around you and perspective. Which is just kind of,
exactly,
which is just really, really cool. All right. So this deer's down. You clearly heard that he crashed. Did you wait and give him time while you were in the tree, or were you like, he's dead, I'm going to basically jump out of this tree stand and parachute out and run to that ridge and put my hands on him? Or were you trying to play it cool just to kind of make sure everything was as it should be?
I played it cool for about 20 minutes, and I told myself an hour. I told myself I was going to wait an hour, and there was absolutely no way I was going to wait an hour. I got down pretty quick within 20 minutes, and I went over and found my arrow, and I found blood. And I just wanted confirmation. And when I found blood, it was just full of the, little bubbles from a lung shot. And I had confirmation. I went back up in the stand and felt a lot better about it, and sat for another 10 or 15 minutes, and then got down and followed the blood trail across the creek. And I just remember walking up the ridge a little bit, and he had fallen perfectly on a log where his antlers were sticking straight up. And I mean, it couldn't have been, I'll have that memory ingrained in my mind for the rest of my life. It couldn't have worked out any better the way he was just laying there.
Nice. So when you're walking up, so I mean, you knew it was a big deer, like when he was coming, right? Like whenever he was running at you, did you have any idea of like the size, or did you just know, man, this is a big deer?
I mean, I was really thinking like, wow, this is, I just killed a 160-inch deer, which I thought would never happen.
Right.
And the closer I got, the more stickers I saw. And then, I mean, it all unfolded before me. And I just remember reaching down and grabbing him and just being so thankful. And then, a couple minutes went by, and I was like, wait a minute, how many points is this thing? And that's when I started counting all the points and everything, and realized, wow, I just, I counted up to 27. It depends on that, but that's really not important to me. it was more about the journey, and just a really truly mature animal. Just being able to get out there and take something like that was just an unbelievable experience.
So what do you like? Just your guess. What would you age him at?
I would have to say, I would probably have to say 5.5.
Yeah.
I actually had a gentleman contact me shortly after, the same night that I shot him, and he had the sheds from last year. So I went down there and, so I went down there and got the shed, and he was, I mean, I'm looking at it right now. He was a 14-point side last year on this one side. So
wow,
he was an absolute toad last year as well. And then he probably put on another 25 or 30 inches this past year.
Wow. Yeah, he's a freak for sure, man. That's awesome. So you got your hands on him. You said you had to drive to a little town like nearby to get some cell service and stuff. How was the drag out of that joint? It seemed like it was some rough country.
Yep, of course. So I was roughly, I would say, anywhere from 3/4 of a mile to a mile back in that ridge. I went to town, called my buddy from West Virginia, and on my way back down, he told me he'd be on his way and that it'd be 3 or 4 hours. Well, I started pulling. I took a sled in there with ice and filled him up with ice because it was so hot.
Right.
And I started pulling him out, and I got him all the way to the creek in about 4 hours. And it was the most miserable drag of my life, but it was the best drag of my life. I mean, I remember telling myself, like, what better pain could you possibly be in than dragging a giant buck out of the woods right now?
That's
and it
right.
Yep, it was amazing.
That's awesome, man. So what's the plans for him, man? Like, full body mount? Is that what we're doing with this? Is that what's happening?
Nope. I wish, trust me. I actually took him for a pedestal mount. So
nice.
It's going to be a really nice black walnut base and a pedestal, and I'll have him in the corner of my room to stare at all the time.
Right. And so you got all this on film, and you're putting a film together. When do you plan to get that finished, and where will you put it out at?
So it's going to be probably another week or two. It's just a matter of me editing, and I'm new to the editing side of things, so it takes a long time. I mean, I didn't realize how detailed it was, but eventually it'll be on my YouTube page, Legends of the Hunt,
mm-hmm.
and I'll post a link to that on Instagram and Facebook and those places.
Nice. So, man, that's what are you gonna do for a follow-up, man?
Well, I'm actually headed up to New York in a couple of weeks, and then I plan on hunting Missouri as well this year.
Nice.
And my goal is just to get out there and kind of have the same strategy and see if I can put a couple more mature bucks on the ground this year.
Nice, man. What if you don't mind me asking, like what region of Missouri?
Missouri, it's going to be northeastern, up by the Iowa border for the most part. There's a couple smaller areas up there that are bow only that
mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to target.
Yep. It's funny you mention that because I'm actually going to Iowa this year. I'll be out. I leave, I think Halloween I leave. And I'll be in I'll be right near where you're going to Missouri, but on the Iowa side. And I've actually looked at a couple of those bow only regions for possible hunts in the future, because that's a reasonable over the counter tag to pick up, and the caliber of animal there is very similar to what you would find across the border in Iowa. But you don't have to wait 4 years to go hunt it, which is nice. So
yeah, that's a dream hunt.
What's that?
I said, that's a dream hunt for you this year. That's awesome.
Yeah. It'll be cool. I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. So I'm pretty excited about it. It'll be cool. I went out and scouted in March, started getting a little bit of a game plan together, but it's going to be, beast style and kind of hunting public style hunting for me the whole time I'm out there, because I don't know a whole lot about what I'm walking into. Have a few areas targeted. I think I found 2 beds while I was out there in the 2 days that I was scouting. And I'm going to kind of start in those areas, and it's going to be a lot of, at least the first day or two of walking in the morning in the daylight and kind of scouting my way to like a spot I want to be at, see if there's sign there. If there is, set up and hunt it. If not, keep walking until I find sign, and when I find sign, set up and hunt it. It's going to be kind of the mode of my mode of operation, I guess, and we'll see what happens. There's definitely deer to be had out there. My buddy lives out there and has been sending me a few pics here and there of some of the deer that are on public. And there's a couple nice deer around there. They got a few nice deer in Iowa. Not too bad.
Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of them.
Yeah. Hopefully we run into one. But man, I appreciate you coming on. Before I let you get going, if you wouldn't mind, let folks out there know where they can find out more about you and follow along with all your hunts and just, be able to stay in contact with you.
Yep, of course. So on Instagram, it's going to be Jake Bush Solo. And then Facebook will be the same thing, Jake Bush. And then my YouTube page is Legends of the Hunt. And I should have quite a bit of content going up on there this year. I'm really excited to bring you guys hopefully some more hunts and some more experiences.
That's awesome, man. Well, hey, dude, I appreciate you coming on the show. Congratulations. Great deer. An even better story, man. The personal aspect of it really is super rad. And I'm glad you got to experience that with all with your family and your buddies. It's there's always moments that we'll remember for a long time. And and just kind of like you said, man, those are the important things. So I'm super stoked for you, and I wish you nothing but the best success the rest of the year. And we'll have to make sure to get together again sometime. Maybe we'll meet up in Southern Ohio one of these days.
Hey, man, that sounds great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Jake for joining. Be sure to give him a follow on Instagram. I'd, of course, like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those two things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, Gumleaf USA Boots, Obsession Bows, Day 6 Gear, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see you.
November's on my heel.